A very good evening to all our viewers today. Today we have with us a very special guest from the most beautiful place in the world. She is a sustainability professional with 15 years of experience in corporate sustainability, ranging from CSR audit, sustainability advisory, and internal corporate functions. She has worked in multicultural environment right from France, Germany, and the US. She has also taught sustainability at the EM Strasbourg Business School Executive MBA. Let us all welcome Ms. Frédérique Nicoli, Senior Sustainability Professional from France. We would be discussing on ESG evolution in France. Welcome, Frédérique. How are you doing today?
Thank you very much, Asha. I'm very pleased and very honored to be with you. So good evening or good afternoon or good morning for everybody, depending on where you sit. Indeed, I'm in Paris, France, and it's with pleasure that I will share my experience and on sustainability in general in France for companies and also on ESG reporting.
Wonderful. So we would like to hand over to you and share with us what has been the ESG evolution in France.
Sure. Maybe I'll give you a bit of context first, because France and Europe is an interesting case, and I wanted just to highlight a few items of the context. So in France, we have a lot of pressure, not only from the law, but from the civil society and even from companies themselves. So I wanted to give you a couple of examples. For example, there's some civil society pressure, and in April 2019, there was an unprecedented democratic experience called the Citizen Convention for the Climate. In French, it's Convention citoyenne pour le climat. It's unprecedented because it aims to give a voice to general citizens who have been elected randomly to accelerate the fight against climate change. And so it brings together 150 people to illustrate the French society diversity. And the mandate of this convention is to define a series of measures to achieve a reduction of at least 40% of the GHG by 2030 compared to 1990, in the spirit of social justice. And it was at the demand of the French President Emmanuel Macron, who had promised that all the selected resolutions for the climate would be would be either submitted without filter, either to the vote of the French Parliament, or to a referendum, or to direct regulatory application. So it was on 6 topics: mobility, consumption, housing, work, food, and the French Constitution. Very interesting process. However, in 2021, when the climate bill has been examined by the National Assembly, only 15 resolutions were actually really transcribed as is by the government, respecting the unfiltered promise. The rest has either been rejected or modified. So it's a bit of a step back from the French government, but it's a very interesting experience, and that helped the pressure from various communities and political organizations to remain strong on the government and on companies. So that's one element, very original from France, that I wanted to share. There's also something that is happening in other countries of the world, in the US, for example, but I wanted to illustrate it for France. It's called the Affair of the Century, l'affaire du siècle in French. It was launched in 2018, and it's an unprecedented legal action in France. It was supported by 4 environmental protection and international solidarity organizations: Notre Affaire à tous, the Fondation pour la Nature et l'Homme, Greenpeace France, and Oxfam France. And these associations were all co-applicants, so they assume all the legal and financial responsibility for this appeal. And they won, actually. more than 2 million engaged citizens signed the petition collected in less than 48 hours. And in total, it was 2 million that was crossed in less than 3 weeks. So quite impressive. And in October of this year, the state was condemned to act for the climate and to repair the consequences of its inaction. So that's what was the affair of this century, was attacking the French government for its climate inaction. So you can see that companies and governments get some pressure, not only from the civil society, but from government association as well. And even companies between them are adding some pressure. For example, there is the CEC, la Convention des entreprises pour le climat, so Business Climate Convention, who started in September of this year with over 150 executive officers, which will meet for 8 months to align the business world in France with the Paris Agreement. And the common objective is to promote the ecological transition of the company. So that's in France. But of course, there's also the international framework of ESG, who is rapidly changing. And you probably all know, I've heard about that on COP26 in November, the IFRS announced the creation of that new standard, the International Sustainability Standard Board, the ISSB. And to help make a more informed decision for investors on company sustainability related risks and opportunities. And that US board just recruited, it was announced today, Emmanuel Faber, the former CEO of Danone, to lead this effort. And yet, in parallel to this approach, to this version, the European version is making some progress with the EFRAG. The EFRAG is the European Financial Reporting Advisory Group. So we don't know who will win this race to impose a reporting standard, but we'll get the response in 2022, next year. And finally, I'm just going to zoom on the European regulatory pressure so that you understand, maybe especially since the majority of the viewer might be from Asia, the Indian continent, etc., the countries from the Asian continent. I wanted to share with you, you probably have heard about Fit for 55. That's a series of measures whose objective is to adapt the European Union in order to achieve the 55% of GHG emission by 2030, and then a net zero emission balance by 2050. So that's the objective of the Green Deal. Why is this program why has this program been launched? Because it was clear that companies didn't report enough, or it wasn't sufficient for investors and other stakeholders to make an informed decision. Therefore, in February of this year, in 2020, the public consultation made a revision of the non-financial reporting directive, and it is now replaced by the CSRD, the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive. So now it's applied to companies with more than 500 companies, and the reporting obligation used to apply to companies with more than 500 employees, and now it concerns companies with more than 250 employees. So, and it applies to certain type of companies who were protected or didn't have to do their reporting, like French SAS or SARL, which are specific status of company in French. So basically, almost all listed company from 10 employees on will have to do their reporting, their CSR reporting, ESG reporting, depending on if you're on the finance space. So basically, currently there's about 10,000 companies who are doing their ESG reporting, and with this replacement, with this new CSRD, it's 5,000 companies in Europe that are affected. It's a new approach in content because climate change, there will be enhancement in the way we report. So on climate change, companies will have to report on mitigation and adaptation, on water and marine resources, on the use of resources and circular economy, on biodiversity and ecosystems. And on each of these different themes, companies will have to set specific objectives and make an analysis of the negative impacts to be more detailed. There will also be more demanding verification because now an independent third party will have to verify the reality of the information. And the calendar for this is that the proposal for the new directive was tabled by the Commission on April of this year, and the new directive will be voted by the Parliament on the spring of next year. So the transposition into different states will probably take place by the end of 2022. So that means for companies, there will be higher requirements, reporting requirements starting in 2024 on the fiscal year 2023. You probably also have heard about the green taxonomy. I'm not going to go into too much detail because it's still in progress, but basically it's a tool of another tool of the European Green Deal to guide the EU towards climate neutrality. And we can say that it's one of the most significant development in sustainable finance. It will help investors, companies also to navigate the transition to a low carbon resilient economy. And it helps to tag the assets, through a standardized approach, and that will make investment easier and classification easier. Although nothing is easier with green taxonomy, but basically it sets the performance threshold, also called technical screening criteria, for economic activities to first, they need to make a substantive contribution to at least one of the 6 environmental goals. So either climate change mitigation or climate change adaptation, sustainable protection of marine and resources, circular transition, pollution prevention, and control and protection of biodiversity, as we said. Second, they must prove they do not significantly harm, and that's at any of the other 5 goals, and that's going to be a tricky part. And also they will need that they meet the minimum safeguards, so the OECD guidelines, the UN guiding principles on human rights, etc. So that was for an overview of the European pressure, legal regulation and legal pressure. Of course, there are limits of all this because sometimes it's partial data, it's not always very standardized, and some themes are not dealt with in the taxonomy, but it's still work in progress. I also wanted to mention something that just happened yesterday from the French law. The French Parliament just voted a new law on parity, requiring that 40% of female directors to hold senior position by 2030 for companies with at least 1,000 employees. And that clearly is a quota requirement for women at the top of large company whose objective is to break the glass ceiling. So 10 years after another law, which imposed the law called Copé-Zimmermann, who imposed 40% of women on board of directors, this text resulted in the observation that actually there's not been any trickle down of feminization to the executive committees and higher management. That's why France has extended the logic of quotas. So I'm not going to talk about task force on climate-related financial disclosure because it's not French, it's international, and you probably have already heard about it. But it's also interesting because it's using tool scenario analysis, and it increased the need of higher reporting standards. Okay, so that was the context, France, Europe, worldwide, that I wanted to share with you before talking about the ESG reporting in France. I wanted to mention something. It's a good practice that I've experienced through my experience in companies, and it's not only France, but France has created a law with specificity, and it exists in other companies. In other countries, sorry. For example, our Italian neighbors have the same. It's called Società Benefit, and the US have, and the UK have a benefit corporation status. But in France, following a law, we have what we called Société à mission. So it's hard to translate, and even Danone, the huge French company that you probably all know, who is Société à Mission, on their website in English, they didn't translate it. They remain, they call it Société à Mission. But for everybody, I'll use a mission-based company, or it's the idea that we wanted to share. So basically, what is it? What is a SAM, a Société à Mission, or mission-based company? It's actually commitment that classic companies, so not NGOs, it's companies that are making profit, and profitable companies, they choose to put their economic model and their profit at the service of a social or an environmental objective. And this has some numerous implications. For example, the need to demonstrate their usefulness to society as a whole. So not only to their economic stakeholders, shareholders, for example, or employees or customers, but also to the general society. And the underlying principle is that companies with a positive impact will thrive, and the other companies might die in the future. So in the French law, we did not recognize the concept of social interest before. But with the creation of that Société à Mission, it's a quality, it's not a status. This has changed. And right now in France, there are already 426 Société à Mission companies. And I'll give you a few examples later. So I forgot to tell you that it was introduced by the French law called PACT, Action Plan for Growth and Transformation of the company, in 2019. So to be a mission-based company, a company must, there are several conditions. Actually, there are 5 conditions. They must issue a reason for being. It's actually a purpose. If I have to translate, we call it raison d'être in French. And I'll give you examples of French raison d'être of international companies so that you'll understand. And in the CAC 40, so it's the index of the 40 biggest companies traded in the French stock market, 82% of companies have a purpose. So they can have it either statutory, so that's 2.5% because it's more complex, or simply declarative. That's 67% of the companies have a purpose, a declarative purpose. when it's not declarative, they must write it into their status, into their bylaws. So at least they must have a purpose. For example, I'll give you the example of Danone still, because I think it's well known in India. It's health through food to as many people as possible. So that's their reason, their purpose. It's very different from a communication or a marketing tool or slogan, because in the long term, it constitutes the lasting protection of the specificities of the companies. You know, that means that Danone will not go away from this purpose. So the second criteria it must meet is that, of course, they have to declare one or more social environmental objectives, and emissions, they must constitute a mission committee with at least one employee in the committee. There will be a verification by an independent third party, and the status of the company, the bylaws, will be declared to the commercial court. So this is, just as a reminder, this is a voluntary process. And the commitments will become verifiable and enforceable because of the verification and the fact that it will be published. The report will be published. So French companies that have raison d'être, purpose, the SNCF, which are our main railroad company, Guerlain, the perfume company, Michelin, which is the tire company, Carrefour, the distribution, PricewaterhouseCoopers France, Yves Rocher, cosmetic company, Société Générale, a bank, Christian Dior, perfume, etc. Christian Dior, another example, beauty as a legacy. So that's their.
So that's an interesting take on creating mission-based companies in France. I'm sure it could be replicated in other parts of the world as well. And France setting the example for all of us. Now, France has sustainability even in its political system with representation from the Green Party. How do you see that it has made difference in the corporations and their thought process?
Well, politics is always complex, but in France, we have actually globally we have witnessed that the inability of our politicians to translate goals into real tangible action with COP26. You know, unfortunately, we've noticed it wasn't helpful. So in some countries, they have elected green leaders in the past, like in Latvia, in the Republic of Mauritius, more recently in Austria. But in France, the Ecologic Party has always been the third or fourth player. So it gives an additional pressure on companies and on the government. But unfortunately, it hasn't been taking part of all the programs, and we are right now in the middle of the preparation of presidential election for next year. And unfortunately, the topic around climate change and sustainability is not at the core of their speeches, which is a bit worrying.
I see. So I'm sure there is a lot of work that Green Party needs to do then.
Yes.
Also, there was a movement of B Corp that garnered a lot of attention. What were the outcomes of the particular movement that you have observed?
Well, maybe should I do a little recap for B Corp in France?
Sure.
It's a, you know, that it's a business, a movement for business as a force for good, and that it was launched in 2014, I think. No, that was the first French company was B Corp certified in 2014. And today there's 200 French B Corp, about 200, a bit less probably. For example, les laboratoires Expansions, you probably know the baby cosmetic creams called Mustela, and that's an example. And out of those less than 200, there's about 30 sociétés à mission. So it's interesting. Well, I can tell you about a bit more about the relationship between société à mission is a declaration, as an intention a priori. That means a company wants to engage and be société à mission. And B Corp is actually a posteriori. Companies fill out a 200 plus survey called the BIA, and they need to get above 80 grade in order to get certified. And that's for the evaluation of all they did. So there's an a priori, a posteriori. It's very complementary. That means you don't have to be société à mission to be B Corp certified, but B Corp France is encouraging companies to do so, because in any case you need to define your purpose, and you need to write it into your bylaws. So it's very complementary. What I noticed is that companies really are attracted by the B Corp, and they want to get the certification, but they are not aware enough of the fact that it's a proof of a long-term commitment. So if you just issue your first sustainability report, or in France it has other names, but if you just did that and you have only 1 year of data, it's really too early to apply for B Corp. So companies often underestimate the work that is needed, because even if you have the greatest policies, sustainable policies, if you didn't translate it and report the results, then you're not going to be B Corp certified.
So, do you think that we should have separate index for companies who come under B Corp?
Well, I don't think so, because right now B Corps are majority small to medium-sized companies. There's huge companies such as Danone, but they are being certified legal entity by legal entity. For example, Danone North America which manufactures food and beverages, is certified since April 2018. Grameen Danone Foods in Bangladesh since November 2018. Alpro Belgium, which is a brand from Danone, in March, etc. Danone Waters Germany in June 2019. So, it's hard to compare and to have an index, because it could be some subsidiaries or very small companies. So not sure an index would make right now a plus, would be a plus.
Okay, it could be a premature thing. One of our viewers have asked a question, Mr. Jha, how will circular economy bring in an optimization of resources?
Well, that's the point of circular economy. I don't see the question. Is it in the chat? Here we go.
I have.
Okay, I see it. Sujay. Okay. Circular economy is about bringing former material that has been used, like waste or secondhand material, to be either transformed or upgraded and reused into from cradle to crane methodology. So companies will be noted and will be valued on how they implemented that circular economy principles.
All right. That's great. So, what do you think in the coming 5 years? How would this space of ESG develop in France? And as it is leading in certain aspects. What changes do you see that would come at a fast pace?
As you mentioned, actually, France has been classified third in a study from EcoVadis. I don't know if you know EcoVadis.
Yeah.
And actually, after Sweden and I forgot who it was. Let me check. But third position, which means really a good job from France in the reporting, into taking into account ESG. However, I think we need to be careful because there's an increased legal requirement, and we have to make sure that companies are not, doing the minimum. They fall into what we call the compliance trap, and they don't just tick the box. And believe me, there will be a many box coming soon, because with the taxonomy, with everything coming, it's going to be harder and harder to keep up with all these requirements. But it's also a way to go beyond the bare minimum, and companies have to see the bigger picture, I think. So there's, of course, a bit of greenwashing still in place, but more and more, because those requirements are forcing companies to be more transparent. They will see the big picture and reap the benefits of a more robust and transparent reporting.
Wonderful. So a lot of compliances is what we could foresee coming.
Yes, from the European part, and French laws translated or independent from the European part, but it's a trigger. Some people are afraid that compared to US or Asia, there will be harder requirements on us, on Europe. But we have to see it on the other side. That means a way to push companies to get more resilient and have a better reporting, more transparent, more accurate, a bit like financial reporting. It has to be more professional, because in the past, in my career, when I started to do sustainability reports, we could report on whatever we wanted. So if we had some bad data, nobody forced us to communicate on it. So we only showed what was good and shiny. But now we have to communicate on everything. And so it's forcing company to improve.
Yeah, so all the colors would be seen now.
Absolutely.
So moving on to my our next question is, IICSR is a dedicated institute for capacity building, advisory and project implementation for developing responsible business leadership. What courses do you think we should conduct in order to accelerate the change in to develop responsible business leaders?
So I looked at the courses, and actually there are some courses that seems to me very valuable. For example, the value creation by ESG reporting, of course, and the SRI, reporting and measurement tools. I mean, the social return on investment is hard to calculate, so that and the sustainability in general is hard to calculate. So that's certainly some value adding classes. However, from my experience, I think biodiversity is often left behind, and it's all about climate change, energy emission, but we tend to lose sight from the fact that we are currently well advanced in the sixth mass extension of wildlife on Earth. And just the way you had business and human rights, I would love to see a course called biodiversity and business, for example. I think it would be helpful to help organizations to make progress on biodiversity protection, because they need to understand, of course, the issue, the underlying issue, but also who are the actors locally or internationally. There is the Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, the IPBS, which is the equivalent of the IPCC for climate change, but this is for biodiversity. And so it would be nice for companies to understand their options, what are the best practices, and it would be super helpful, because right now what I witness is, unfortunately, companies have stayed at the basic level, which is planting trees. I mean, it's great planting trees when it's done properly, and not always the same essence everywhere, or that is ridiculous. But when it's well done with different size of trees and all the groundwork that has to be done, that's great, but that's not sufficient. So what they do is, like, they what else do? They put beehives on rooftop. I mean, this is really nice, but this is not sufficient. So I think they need guidance, and if you could have a class on this, that would be a really value-added class, I think.
You'll see that in the early months of 2022,
Oh,
biodiversity and
excellent.
business. I'm
I didn't
sure
know.
by Feb March we will definitely do that.
Very good.
So, Frederick, it has been wonderful talking to you and learning so much about the sustainability initiative at France, and the leadership that the government and the corporations are taking to lead the world in this space. Any message to all our viewers who are watching right now, or who would watch the recorded session later?
Sure. I'd say that, and it's been said through many of your videos that I watched. I mean, CSR is a journey. So we need to sit tight and get our seatbelt, because it's going to be shaky in the coming years. But I would advise to keep an eye on the European Union legislation and best practice of European companies, because in many ways they are leading the way. And France will take the presidency of the EU next year in January for 6 months. So there's a high probability that they will develop, for example, the opportunity of having the SAM, Société à Mission, quality throughout Europe. And also, I wanted to share that former CSR leader or were generalist practitioners, just like me. We were touching a bit to everything, and now it's the subjects, the topics are getting so complex that we need to have to talk to experts on biodiversity, on water, on climate, on emission, on energy, etc. Because one person still the orchestra leader, the conductor, but it's getting complex, more and more complex, as we've seen. But yeah, it's also in every difficulty lies the opportunity, the associated opportunity. So I hope this will bring less greenwashing, because we've seen that also there's a mission washing also in France, because companies think it's that's there this media craze and fashion effect around Société à Mission. They all say, oh, I want to be Société à Mission, but they are not serious in the way they are doing it, because they're not they don't engage with external stakeholders. They just do everything internally. Sometimes it's not well carried by the the upper management. So there are some traps also in that. Even though it looks good, it's not always very shiny under the the image, the superficie. But there are some very good opportunities for companies if they want to move in this direction.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you so much, Frederique, for your presence and sharing so much of knowledge with us. We all wish you bon journée and bon weekend.
Thank you. Have a great day too. Oh, great evening.
Thank you. Thank you so much.